I stared at the bright orange violation notice stuck to my front door with mounting disbelief. $750 fine for unauthorized watercraft storage in residential driveway. My blood began to boil as I read the additional notes. Boats must be stored in designated marina facilities as per Lakeview Estates HOA Bylaw Section 8.3. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more HOA stories. My name is Michael Harrington, and 6 months ago, I fulfilled my lifelong dream of buying lakefront property. After 20 years running my construction business, I finally had enough saved to purchase this slice of heaven. 5 acres of wooded land with 200 feet of private shoreline on Silver Lake. The property included a modest 3-bedroom cabin that needed work, but the location was perfect. I'd grown up fishing on this very lake with my grandfather, who always told me, "Someday, Mike, all this could be yours." I never took him literally until his will revealed he'd left me a substantial inheritance specifically to claim your piece of Silver Lake. What my new neighbors at Lakeview Estates didn't know was that I hadn't just purchased shoreline property. 3 months before buying the cabin, I'd quietly acquired 118 acres of the actual lake, nearly 60% of Silver Lake itself, from the county in a tax sale. The previous owner, a land development company that went bankrupt, had defaulted on property taxes for years. I'd kept this information private, planning to eventually build a small dock for my boat. I hadn't expected to be welcomed to the neighborhood with a fine. I grabbed the notice and marched straight to the HOA office, a pretentious little building with Lakeview Estates Community Association emblazoned on a polished brass plaque. Inside, a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair sat behind a desk. Her nameplate read, "Margaret Winters, HOA President." "Good morning," I said, placing the violation notice on her desk. "I'd like to discuss this." Margaret glanced at the paper, then at me. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Harrington from Shoreline Drive. Yes, we've had several complaints about your boat. What's the problem exactly?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "As clearly stated in the bylaws you agreed to when purchasing property in our community, boats must be stored at the community marina, not in residential driveways," she explained as if talking to a child. "It's unsightly and reduces property values." "I wasn't aware of this rule when I purchased," I said. "The previous owner left no documentation, and my realtor didn't mention HOA restrictions." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Ignorance of our bylaws doesn't exempt you from following them, Mr. Harrington. The fine stands, and you have 72 hours to move your boat to the marina. Slip rental is $350 monthly, payable to the HOA." I raised an eyebrow. "So I need to pay a fine and rent a slip at your marina?" "Those are the rules everyone follows," she said firmly. "We pride ourselves on maintaining Lakeview Estates' prestigious appearance." I took a deep breath. "And who owns the marina?" "The HOA maintains it for the benefit of all residents," she replied. "That's not what I asked," I said. "Who legally owns the marina and the lake frontage it's built on?" Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "Technically, the HOA leases the marina space from Silver Lake Recreation LLC. I nodded slowly. "And who owns Silver Lake itself?" She waved dismissively. "The lake is public property governed by county regulations. Now, about your violation." "Actually," I interrupted, "the lake isn't entirely public property anymore." I reached into my pocket and unfolded the property deed I'd brought along just in case. I slid it across her desk. "I own 118 acres of Silver Lake, including the water rights. I purchased it from the county 3 months ago." The color drained from Margaret's face as she examined the document. This can't be right." "It is," I assured her. "And interestingly, your marina appears to extend about 30 feet into my property. I've been meaning to have a surveyor confirm the exact boundaries." Margaret's perfectly manicured nails tapped nervously on her desk. "This doesn't change the fact that your boat violates HOA regulations." I smiled. "Fair enough. I'll move my boat from my driveway within 72 hours as requested." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you for understanding." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, standing up. "I'll be launching my boat into the lake, and anchoring it just offshore from my cabin. Since the watercraft will no longer be in my driveway, the HOA regulations won't apply." I turned to leave but paused at the door. "By the way, I'll need documentation showing the HOA has permission to operate a marina on my property, along with proof of liability insurance. Otherwise, I may have to reconsider public access to that portion of the lake." The following morning, I awoke to the sound of frantic knocking. I opened my door to find Margaret and three men in polo shirts embroidered with the HOA logo. "Mr. Harrington," Margaret began, her voice strained but civil, "this is our HOA board. We'd like to discuss your claim to the lake." I invited them in, offering coffee which they declined. The tallest man, who introduced himself as Richard Coleman, HOA vice president and local real estate developer, got straight to the point. "We've reviewed your deed, and while it appears legitimate, the lake has traditionally been treated as public access. Our community was built with the understanding that you could do whatever you wanted without consulting the actual owner." I finished for him. "That's not fair," protested another board member. "The previous owner never enforced any restrictions." "The previous owner went bankrupt and abandoned the property," I pointed out. "I'm not them." Margaret leaned forward. "What exactly are you planning to do, Mr. Harrington?" I considered my next words carefully. "I'm planning to enjoy my property just like anyone would. But I'm also planning to ensure others respect my property rights." "Meaning?" Richard pressed. "Meaning that effective immediately, I'm prohibiting commercial operations on my portion of the lake without proper licensing and insurance. That includes the HOA marina." The room erupted in protests until I raised my hand. "I'm not unreasonable," I continued. "I'm willing to draft a formal agreement allowing the marina to continue operation under certain conditions." "What conditions?" Margaret asked suspiciously. "First, the $750 fine against me is rescinded. Second, I receive full marina privileges for life at no cost. Third, the HOA amends its bylaws to exclude my property from boat storage restrictions." "That's outrageous," Richard exclaimed. "You can't demand special treatment." "I'm not," I replied calmly. "I'm negotiating terms for the use of my property. You're currently operating a for-profit marina on land you don't own. Without my permission, that's trespassing." The fourth board member, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What happens if we refuse?" I shrugged. "Then I'll exercise my right to restrict access to my portion of the lake, including the area where your marina is located. I'll also need to prohibit fishing, swimming, and boating in those waters." "You'd cut off lake access to the entire community out of spite?" Margaret gasped. "Not spite," I corrected. "Property rights. The same rights your HOA is so dedicated to enforcing." I let them stew in uncomfortable silence before adding, "I should mention I've scheduled a surveyor to mark my lake boundaries next week. Once that's done, I'll be installing buoys indicating private property." The board members exchanged worried glances. "We need to discuss this with our attorney," Richard finally said. "Of course," I agreed. "In the meantime, I'll be keeping my boat exactly where it is until this matter is resolved." 2 days later, I was enjoying my morning coffee on my dock when I noticed unusual activity at the community beach. People were gathering, pointing toward my property, and several boats were heading in my direction. The lead boat, a sleek pontoon, carried Margaret and Richard. They approached cautiously, stopping several yards from my dock. "Mr. Harrington," Margaret called out. "The community would like to speak with you." I gestured toward my dock. "Feel free to tie up." As they secured their boat, I noticed more residents arriving by foot along the shoreline. Within minutes, at least 30 people had assembled on and around my property. Richard cleared his throat. "The HOA board has called an emergency community meeting to address your lake ownership situation. And you decided to hold it on my land without permission?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. A murmur ran through the crowd. "We thought it appropriate to discuss it where everyone can see exactly what's at stake," Margaret explained. "Many residents have owned property here for generations. Their families have fished and boated on Silver Lake for decades." An elderly man stepped forward. "My grandchildren learned to swim in this lake. Are you really going to fence it off?" I looked at the concerned faces surrounding me and sighed. This wasn't what I wanted. I had no desire to be the villain in this community. "I never intended to restrict reasonable personal use of the lake," I explained. "My issue is with the HOA imposing fines and fees for access to property they don't own." "Then what do you want?" someone called from the crowd. "Respect," I answered simply. "The same respect for my property rights that you all expect for yours. I bought this land legally, paid fair market value, and want to enjoy it without unreasonable restrictions." Richard stepped closer. "The board has drafted a proposal we believe addresses your concerns while protecting community interests." He handed me a document outlining a compromise. The fine would be canceled and my property would be exempt from certain HOA regulations, including boat storage restrictions. In exchange, I would grant an easement allowing continued operation of the marina and community access to the lake for recreational purposes. We're also prepared to offer you compensation for the marina's use of your lake frontage, Margaret added. A fair lease agreement, properly documented. I reviewed the proposal carefully while 30 pairs of eyes watched anxiously. It was reasonable, more than reasonable actually. But something still bothered me. Before I agree to anything, I said, addressing the crowd, I want to know how many of you have received fines from the HOA in the past year. Nearly half the people raised their hands. And how many of those fines were for minor infractions that didn't actually harm anyone? Most hands remained up. I turned to the board members. This isn't just about my boat or my lake. It's about how this community is governed. I'll sign your agreement on one additional condition. The HOA board agrees to review all bylaws with resident input and eliminate excessive restrictions that serve no purpose beyond generating revenue through fines. Margaret looked ready to object, but Richard placed a restraining hand on her arm. That's not unreasonable, he admitted. Over the next month, something remarkable happened. The HOA, under pressure from residents emboldened by my stand, established a bylaw review committee. Unnecessary restrictions were eliminated, and reasonable ones were clarified with resident input. I kept my boat in my driveway, covered with a high-quality tarp as a compromise. The buoys marking my lake boundaries became simple informational markers rather than prohibition signs. And most importantly, the community began using the lake as it was meant to be used, for enjoyment, not profit or control. 6 months later, I hosted the first annual Silver Lake Community Fishing Tournament on my portion of the lake. Margaret even won the prize for largest base, which she accepted with surprising grace. As the sun set over Silver Lake that evening, my grandfather's words echoed in my mind, "Someday, Mike, all this could be yours." He hadn't just meant the property, he meant the responsibility that came with it. I didn't just own a lake. I was its steward, and now I shared that stewardship with a community that had learned an important lesson about respecting property rights. All property rights, not just the ones convenient to enforce. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't about winning a battle. It's about changing the terms of engagement entirely. The HOA still exists at Lakeview Estates, but now it serves the community rather than ruling it, a distinction as clear as the boundary between land and water on the shores of Silver Lake.